Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Mark Eltis. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be speaking about one of my favorite topics, which is multifocal contact lenses. Some of my other interests are glaucoma and dry eye. And when I tell a patient that's come in for a regular exam that they have glaucoma, no one's ever too excited. And they don't really thank you and say, "Thank you, doctor, for bringing up a lifelong disease that I didn't know I had, and now I have to treat and worry about for the rest of my life." With dry eye, you also get patients who are already generally walking in unhappy because they've suffered with a condition. And I have to tell them it's a chronic condition that doesn't have a cure, and we'll just try to manage it. You contrast that with someone who hasn't seen well in the up close for a while. They come in not expecting there to be a solution for contacts. And you tell them, "Hey, we can do something about this, and you can see again as if you were younger." And that look they give you when they're in the waiting room and they've put on the contact lenses and they finally see their phone and look in the distance, that's a magical moment that you don't get very often with other types of treatments. So that's why I title this Multifocal Magic, and it's truly an art and a science to help patients with those types of contact lenses. So here are my disclosures. I don't think it's anything particularly relevant. I have spoken for contact lens companies, but I won't be mentioning any brands today. To start you off with a theme, we listen to the lyrics. So much about nostalgia and songs and culture is about remembering youth. And as the lyrics say, people want to remember being young. People want to revert to that episode in their lives. When you're helping them with multifocal contacts, you're not just giving them vision, but you're also taking them back on an emotional journey. And that is something powerful, because if you think about why people take actions, purchase products, do anything in life, it's mostly driven by emotion. So that's something very important, and we're going to talk about that later in the presentation as well. Getting to some nitty-gritty facts, there will be 2 million presbyopes on the planet by 2030. So this is definitely a huge explosion of presbyopes. It's certainly something not to be missed or to be ignored by healthcare providers. About half of Americans are over 40, and certainly they have more disposable income than younger people, and they're looking to feel and be younger in any way they can. Now, they're not looking to party at a nightclub, but they want the most out of life and to get the best for themselves. And if it can mean looking younger, that's also a plus. There's a lot of studies that show that when presbyopes have a solution in contact lenses, they feel younger, their confidence increases, and they're willing to socialize more. In 2022, the anti-aging market was estimated to be worth $67 billion US. So when you talk about patients being hesitant to invest in certain things, this wouldn't be one of them. One of my great friends and colleagues, the Hollywood eye doctor, Elise Briscoe, often says in her talks that patients are reluctant to spend on procedures for, let's say, dry eye, when she was offering them in West LA, even where people had a lot of disposable income. But once she showed them the aesthetic values of procedures like radiofrequency and IPL, they were much more interested in buying it. So what that tells you is that when there is a vision or ocular disease component, it's one thing, but when you combine that with an aesthetic component, it's quite another. So I'm not trying to tell you not to be a doctor and speak of things scientifically or deal with patients in a professional manner. I'm simply explaining that their decision process will be biased or influenced by their desire for this anti-aging market. Now, speaking of the problems that presbyopes have, 80% will have trouble with medicine food labels. 60% find it hard to see their mobile phone. 40% find it difficult to reach their wristwatch. And 20%, this is scary, everybody, admit to signing receipts without being able to read the credit card slip. Now, there's competition everywhere, from online to down the street to whatever have you, new technologies that threaten the way we've practiced optometry for a very long time. So how do we have a share in this market, and what are our competitive advantages? Well, I can tell you that certainly spherical contact lenses and doing something that patients can find ways around seeing an eye care professional is probably not the future of optometry. What probably is the future is doing things that other people can't, or that's not easily accessible as a commodity. So basically a professional service. And when we talk about that, obviously finding a multifocal solution or a solution for presbyopia is one of those things where we can excel. So how can we address these challenges with contact lenses? Well, there's several different options. I joke that I'm a dinosaur. I have been in practice for 20 years, even though some people still sometimes think I look like I'm 12. And when I started practicing, a lot of the fits that we were doing were monovision. And this was I started in West Los Angeles. And the doctor I was working with, he was really great, very skilled. He was doing a lot of hard contact lenses, and his patients loved it. But I was just newly graduated. I'd been in practice for, I think, a year. And I did a lot of monovision because, frankly, the multifocals didn't work. So it was a cheap and cheerful choice for early presbyopes, and it still is. And patients can remain in the contact lenses that they're currently wearing. Now, that can be a bigger issue for patients in their 40s or 50s because they're more used to a certain brand and they're more hesitant, perhaps, to switch into something new. Now, there are obviously disadvantages to monovision. You have reduced stereopsis and contrast. You can have adaptation issues and suppression. You get an imposed anisometropia. Remember, we're kind of forcing one eye to see in the distance, one eye to see it near. And you do get reduced intermediate vision, particularly in the higher ads, because that disparity between the distance and near is widening. Now, it doesn't always work in multifocal, the solution doesn't work in monocular patients because obviously you can't do both with one eye. And I was going to add too, it doesn't work in some patients as well for various reasons. And the part which probably bothers me the most, because I love the art version of this, or the art component of multifocal fits, is it lacks creative solutions. There's only so much you can do with a pure monovision fit. So what is the next generation solution to this problem? Well, it's soft multifocal contact lenses. With this kind of a solution, you get binocular vision maintained. There's little impact on stereopsis, and there's quite a few studies to show it. In fact, I was going to say this for later, but I'll break it now, that patients actually continually adapt to the multifocal contacts. So they're getting better over the course of a month as they wear them. That improvement doesn't occur with monovision correction. Now, you also get correction for intermediate distances with a multifocal contact lens. And contrary to when I started 20 years ago, you get a higher rate of success with these designs. And that's really what's made the difference, because these days I can confidently put on a multifocal contact lens, and I sometimes can get it bang on the first fit, which I can tell you years ago was not true. I remember even speaking about multifocal contacts a few years ago, and we were using a statistic that showed that only 3% of multifocal, of all contact lens fits were multifocals. That number has gone up substantially, I'm happy to report, but it's still not where it should be. So with multifocal contact lenses, you get simultaneous vision at different distances. Now, if you think about it, this is a particular advantage compared to monovision and also compared to other options. Now, speaking of multifocal contact lenses, most patients don't even know they exist. So you're unlikely to have a patient walk in asking for them unless they have a friend who's wearing them or if they've done their research. Some patients have been told by their doctor that multifocal lenses don't work. Remember, this is a historical issue because especially older practitioners remember the initial failures of multifocal contact lenses. And they're not totally wrong that those lenses weren't very effective. So, the doctors had disappointing outcomes. They don't want to waste the time, money, energy, and perhaps they feel like they're losing face in front of the patient if they tried and it fails. So they are either hesitant to try it, or if they do try it, they are kind of already have that mindset that's going to fail, or at the first sign of resistance or patient, let's say, pushback, they're going to say, oh yeah, I guess it doesn't work. Let's go back to doing whatever we were doing. Some patients have also tried multifocal contact lenses, but because the doctor either wasn't sure how to make the proper adjustments or it was an older design, they didn't adapt to it, so they think there's nothing new on the market, which again isn't true. So other patients were fit in outdated lenses that were either uncomfortable or had poor visual performance. Remember that in the old days, these lenses weren't SiHy, so the comfort issues were bigger, and the lenses may have been uncomfortable for other reasons, and the patients just don't know what is available in today's marketplace. In my opinion, you get more freedom and flexibility with multifocal contact lenses than glasses, LASIK, or any other surgical option. If we're talking about glasses, you're talking about a progressive lens where there's distortion on the side, and you also have to look through a specific part of the lens to get correction. With LASIK, the issue is either we correct you in the distance, we do monovision, where we have mentioned the disadvantages, and it's essentially it can't be moved around like a contact lens, adjusted, you have to do surgery again. In the multifocal options, I recently published long-term outcomes of LASIK paper, and of course there are multifocal corrections available in refractive surgery, but none of them are perfect, and certainly I'm particularly hesitant to put a multifocal correction that you can't adjust, when I know for most multifocal fits that you need a little bit of tweaking or to really understand the patient and gauge their response. So I'm hesitant to put a permanent solution in a irreversible process. So having said all that, the multifocal contact lenses are, in my view, the best choice. You get the freedom, flexibility, you can adjust it, and the patient can decide at any point to opt out. So when we talk about general tips, just like anything in optometry, listening to the patient is the most important. Now, I know as a student, you heard this all the time. As a practitioner, I'm sure you found it to be true. The case history is most important. We want to strategize. If a patient is driving, we want to know that. How often do they drive? Are they driving at night? Are they using a computer all day? Are they interacting with clients? What are they doing? Because I want to know every little advantage I can have, which I will exploit in the fit. Now, you can say, well, Mark, a lot of the patients today are going to do everything. They're going to drive, they're going to look in the distance, they have to read fine print. I get that. And they might need several corrections or several options. Or in the worst case scenario, I have to tell them, well, look, some tasks will require a glasses correction over top of the contact lenses or a modification. That's fine. But whatever advantage I can get, I want to use that. So are they planning on wearing it full-time, part-time? Again, let's say I don't have a correction available in the SiHy lens. If they're only going to wear it for a few hours for an outing, a movie, or to play hockey, then I can find that solution. I'm just smiling inside because I said hockey, which is very Canadian of me. But, I'm sure they still play hockey in LA and the Southwest. Understanding your patient's lifestyle will allow you to strategize. And this is the whole point, that multifocal contact lenses is about strategy and understanding the patient. So the more you can extract from them, the better. And then you also can do this at follow-up when they come back at a 1 week's time or whatever it may be, and they say, it didn't really work out so well. And you want to pull out where it didn't work out, why it didn't work out. I even tell patients when I let them go home with the contact lenses, let me know what isn't working. Now, I don't tell me everything that wasn't perfect. We're looking for function, not perfection. Which brings me to an excellent point, which is it's always better to explain first than apologize later. This is true for everything in optometry, whether it's a treatment, whether it's an in-office procedure. You want to tell them the shortcomings, the potential shortcomings of the lenses prior to them experiencing them. Why? Because when you tell them, these lenses may not be as good in dim conditions when you're driving at night, when they experience that, they'll say, oh yeah, Dr. Smith told me this is going to happen. But if you don't, and they come back and say, you know what, I was trying to drive at night and there's a total decrease in the performance, they're going to say, and you say to them, oh yeah, well, that happens with multifocal contacts, they're going to say, oh, he's probably just making excuses. So that's why you want to prepare them for that potential hurdle. So there will be a compromise. That's just the nature of the contact lens. So when I get patients in who I can tell are very, type A personality, the same kind of patients which wouldn't be great for LASIK, who will say, I want perfection. I want to be 2015 after the surgery, if they even research that and know what that is. That's not a great candidate. And I always explain to them that the professional fees are something they're going to have to pay. And if it doesn't work, that's not something they're going to get back. Now, in most of the cases, it's not an issue. And of course, I'll do everything I possibly can for it to work. I can think of a handful of patients in a 20-year career where they, started complaining, and I just gave them the money back just not to deal with it. But in most patients, they understand it's a professional fee. So you need to understand how picky the patient is and what they're willing to compromise on. I had a police officer who was my patient, I remember a few years ago, and she was really tough. I could tell this was going to be a hard battle, and I had to really be blunt and explain to her, look, for really tiny stuff, you're going to have to wear reading glasses over top. You're just not going to be able to see it. And if I corrected you so you can see the medicine bottle, it would compromise your distance and intermediate and your normal reading for your cell phone. So she understood that that was not possible. So you really want to manage expectations. You want to explain the process may require several visits. So they don't think if it's not right the first time that it's a failure. But it also will explain the higher fitting fee. No matter, you might slice it different ways. I charge a flat fee, and it, depends. Like basically, I might get it the first shot, but they're going to pay that upfront fee. And if it takes, 3 or 4 visits, they're not paying any more. So they have that security. Most of the time, honestly, it takes me less visits these days, so it works out in my favor. Well, one of the main reasons doctors don't want to fit multifocal contact lenses is they think they won't be compensated properly for their time. That's a legitimate worry because multifocal contacts can take a lot of time, and it might be a frustrating process, especially if you're younger in your career. So that's why you want to set a profitable fee schedule, whether you're charging them as your jurisdiction allows per visit or as a flat rate. Now, in my opinion, if we want to compete with what's out there, you want to do the things, don't do the things that anyone can do. You want to do the challenging things that few doctors do well. And this is where multifocal contact lenses come in. People are getting into dry eye, into binocular vision, pediatrics, specialty contacts. Those are all great fields, and I've been, indulged in those as well. However, if you think about it, most patients, or certainly all your presbyopic patients may need multifocal contact lenses. So you're casting a much wider net. If you're good at this, you can get a lot more referrals than if you're just focused on a very niche area. One of the concepts that's very important, and it's perhaps, I liken it to when you're doing a subjective refraction. You want to make the patient feel like you're working as a team, but not in the same position. This is a picture I took at a LA Rams game a few years back. I'm a big LA Rams fan. And so the quarterback and the wide receiver and the running back are different positions in football. Basically, someone takes the ball and throws it to another player or gives it to another player to run. One player doesn't do everything. Now, everyone has to understand their role for the team to work together. It's the same thing with a multifocal contact lens. You don't want to put the patient in charge. So just like in a refraction where they're like, oh, can you add, another one more click? They don't know what's going on. Some patients are legitimately trying to help you, but it's going to hamper the process. So same thing when a patient's like, can you just give me a little bit more in the distance, or can you take out the near? Not based on their performance, but based on their just feeling that they just want it a little sharper. You have to explain to them that this is a compromise and we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Anything we take from the distance will, to improve the reading, will have a negative effect on the other. So what I'm trying to say is that if it's functioning, don't let the patient guide you. It's only about what's not functioning. So who's a candidate and when? Well, remember that hyperopes will feel the effect sooner in glasses, while myopes will feel it sooner in contact. Hyperopes may have general presbyopic symptoms earlier just because of the nature of the condition. Remember that they'll probably need, a little bit of plus to read, and then they're going to start also having it the problem in the distance. And those are the patients that tell you, oh my God, you ruined my vision because before I can see, then I started needing reading glasses and now I can't see in the distance. But these patients, a spoiler alert, happen to be the easiest patients to fit with multifocal contact lenses. And I'll leave you on that teaser and explain more shortly. So an interesting phenomenon occurs where contact lens use declines with age despite increase in refractive error. So that's pretty crazy because the more patients advance in life and the more refractive error they have, the less they're using contact lenses. Now that makes no sense if we look at it from an objective standpoint, but there are reasons why that is. So comfort is the main reason why patients of all ages stop wearing contact lenses. But an interesting split exists when presbyopia is reached. So under 40, comfort is the primary reason. Over 40, vision becomes a significant reason for dropout. So some considerations in terms of resolving that and what kind of contact lenses to use. You'll have a choice between SiHy and conventional lenses. Obviously, it's a no-brainer to use SiHy, all things being equal, but some older patients can be resistant to switching, and you have to explain to them that the lens is thicker, but in fact has advantages. Obviously, the higher oxygen, and it'll dry less over time. And you want to make sure before they leave the office that they can take out the SiHy lens, because it'll be easier to put in, but it'll be much harder to remove, or can be harder to remove, some brands specifically, than a conventional lens. The 2-week versus daily versus monthly, obviously, if you can go into a daily, that's the way to go. Some patients will be more resistant to the increased cost, or some lenses won't have all the parameters in a daily lens. I mentioned patient familiarity with the brand. It's always something you want to exploit to your advantage if you can. If they're wearing brand X, you want to go to brand X for presbyopia, whatever that may be, if you can. Some patients will be open to several solutions based on different tasks. So I've had patients, let's say, on a monthly lens during the week and a daily lens for their trips on the weekend. Everything's possible. You don't want to limit yourself. Now, some interesting questions, especially for younger practitioners. Can amblyopic and strabismic patients be good candidates? Can patients with cataracts be good candidates? And can emmetropes, who now are emerging presbyopes, also wear the contact lenses for that near issue alone? Well, let's break it down. Emmetropes with emerging presbyopia are, generally speaking, the hardest, most challenging patients to fit. Why? Because they already have perfect vision in the distance. So if I put a multifocal contact lens, the first thing they're going to notice is the distortion in the distance. Now, you can draw their attention to the reading, which will obviously be improved, but there's that overall blur that they never experienced before. And it's just like your patients who have that quarter minus that were never, in glasses before. They complain more than a -8, who's gone to a -9. They just are more sensitive to any degradation in their vision. Hyperopes, generally speaking, are easier than myopes because you can push plus much more easily, and it's a win-win. The more plus you get, the better their distance and the better their near within reason. Sometimes patients with the worst VA, with all the problems, cataracts, presbyopia, strabismus or amblyopia, are the easiest to fit because they have very low expectations. So the more complicated the patient, the easier the process. I know that sounds crazy, but that's true because they aren't picky. No one's ever remotely fixed their problem. No one's ever tried. And think about it, the only ice cream you've ever had is the best ice cream. If you don't know, there is a million flavors. That vanilla ice cream tastes just fine. Motivation may be the single most important factor. It's one of the reasons why teenagers are, so good at putting on contact lenses. That motivation may be less, high when they're in their 40s or 50s, but definitely I think that's the main predictor of success. And of course, vision isn't always what you think it is. They can be 20 happy, and some people can be 20/20 miserable. Don't make assumptions about who is or isn't interested in multifocal contacts. I know we stereotypically think of a woman in their 40s or 50s, but men can be excellent multifocal contact lens candidates. And in fact, even guys that we don't necessarily think about, like guys in construction or other, jobs that it's not a cosmetic issue, but if you look through a progressive addition lens in glasses, you can't work up on top because you're looking through your distance. So these are limitations of glasses where contact lenses will have an advantage. Of course, you want to tell them if they're doing something like construction or anything where there's danger to the eye to wear protection over top. Don't assume the cost is prohibitive. When I was working early in my career, it was in the Beverly Hills area, and patients were, some of the most wealthy patients came in dressed like slobs. They had nothing to prove. They were just in a t-shirt and shorts and sandals. And the same thing, now I'm working in Yorkville, which is a affluent area in Toronto. And you don't want to make assumptions. Some patients who are very, independently wealthy don't want to spend on this. And some patients are looking to spend their disposable income on something that makes them feel good, allows them to see, and gives them self-confidence. So don't make any assumptions. Assume everybody is interested. Propose it. Obviously, no one says you have to be pushy, but give them the possibility of accepting or rejecting this option. Multifocal contact lenses also complement your other specialty areas. So speaking of areas that I'm interested in, dry eye is one of them. You want to deal with the dryness before proceeding with a multifocal contact lens fit. Why? Because think about it, it's like running a marathon in high heels when you have a sore foot. It's not really going to work out so well. So you want to treat whatever foot condition the patient has, and then they're more willing or able to wear various kinds of shoes, right? So you don't want to start off with an irritated eye, an eye that's red and very dry, because even the best multifocal contact lens, one daily SiHy, will have a higher chance of failing or being blurred. I couldn't help myself because I love dry eye. You don't need to have a million pieces of equipment to start a dry practice. A questionnaire, a slit lamp you've got, maybe a debrider, something to express the glands, something to treat Demodex at home or in the office, and staff to potentially counsel. We all really have the option to have those things. Then you can get more advanced with IPL, RF, low-level light therapy, and whatever it may be. But you don't have to have the fanciest office to treat dry eye. Remember that just like most specialty services, if you wait for the patient to come in asking for a dry treatment or multifocal contacts, you'll be waiting a long time. They're hiding in plain sight. They want it. They just don't know it's available, or they're too shy to ask. You have to bring it up. Just have to make them aware of what's available out there. And trust me, they will want it. Remember that the main reasons for contact lens failure is not vision, but comfort. Dry eye worsens with age. These patients are more likely to be on medication that can make dry eye worse, like antihistamines and antidepressants and other medications. Systemic conditions make dry eye worse, and so do the medications, so that's something to keep in mind. All the more reason to treat the dry eye before it's an issue. I'm not going to harp on this too much, but don't forget to check dominance. Some patients, I used to do a lot of consulting for multifocal contact lens companies, and a lot of the doctors that contacted me would tell me, this isn't working, that's not working, and they hadn't checked for dominance. It's something you definitely want to do. I like the hole in hand technique. I won't get into too much technical stuff. I know there's a lecture right after me about those things, but hole in the hand I like because you get a objective and subjective response. You need an updated prescription. Every quarter counts. Again, one of the main reasons for failure in my experience was the doctors did not provide an updated prescription. You need to have that. It can't be 6 months old. It can't be a year old. Why? Because just like football is a game of inches, multifocal contact lens fits are a game of quarters. So, if you want to be a good quarterback in the contact lens world, you need to have an updated prescription. Follow the fitting guide. Don't choose your own adventure. Every contact lens manufacturer has spent a lot of money to develop a guide which is tailored to their lens. Respect it and go with it. Because if you go rogue and just choose your own adventure, there's no saving you. You can't refer back to the guide once you haven't followed those steps. So why make it harder on yourself? And why try to figure out a lens that's already had their own scientists work on it? Using that guide is your guide to success. Once the lenses are on, make sure that you allow them to settle. I have them, the patients waiting in a well-lit waiting room that will have them see the advantages. And hopefully they're going to have to read something. That's a plus if they have something to read. Once the lenses are settled, you want them to check their cell phone first. Why? No matter what I do, the multifocal contact lens won't be better than their distance correction. So there's no way I can improve that with a multifocal contact lens. What I can improve is their up-close vision, and that's what I want them to see first. You want to check binocular VA first. This is breaking all the rules of optometry. You're not checking monocularly. You're checking with the lights on, both eyes together, and I start with a 20/50 line. Why? In my jurisdiction, that's the legal driving limit. So when they read it, and they should be reading it with ease, I say, great, now you're legal to drive. And they're very happy. Now, you want to have the patients try it on for at least a week. In fact, longer is better because, as I said, research shows that they adapt beyond that 1 week mark to a multifocal contact lens, and the brain actually does its thing and their vision improves. And remember, have the patient judge whether they can function, not whether the lens is perfect. So when do you stop? Stop when the patient reaches that point of happy confusion and is trying to find what's wrong with the lens. You want to make notes in the chart so that you know what to do at your follow-up. It's so much harder when a patient comes in and a few weeks have gone by and you've seen a million patients. It's hard to remember the nuances of that case. So I always leave myself notes. If the distance is a problem, do X. If the mirror is a problem, do Y. If the lens is uncomfortable, switch to this lens. That way, you've given yourself a cheat sheet and you know what to do in that moment, especially if you have a short window for that follow-up. If the lenses just aren't making any sense, you're getting a horrible VA with the lens, or the patient's complaining that the vision is awful. And I say this, I joke around with students, not if it's your first fit, because that might be you, but otherwise, it's probably the lens. There's only one base curve that it comes in. And if the lens is decentered, Mile Brujic, who's a great optometrist, I remember him giving a presentation that they did research, I think, with OCT. And they showed that if the lens is decentered even a little bit, the optics can be way off. So at that point, you have to abandon ship and try a different lens. If it's happening to you a lot, it's probably not the lens, it's probably you. One of the most important things to remember is that every multifocal contact lens will have decreased performance under dim lighting. That's something you're just going to have to tell patients because you don't want them to experience it, as I mentioned, before you warn them. I don't think it's a big deal, and most patients can live with it. Daily options for contact lenses are the most convenient. They're great for part-time wearers too. There's no contact lens products, and it's generally healthier. Sky-high lenses are great for safety and contact lens microbial keratitis prevention. You want to tell patients not to swim, sleep, shower, or nap in their contact lenses. I always document it. Remember that older patients may not know, or they haven't really worn lenses like this in a while. They're probably not partying as much as young people, but they might swim in the lenses. They might not know they can't, or shower, or just take a nap. And that's also very dangerous. Multifocal patients can be busy travelers, and they may not nap on the plane. I don't really like patients wearing contact lenses on the plane. Obviously, in the new Dreamliners and the advanced planes, there's more humidity, but it's generally a dry environment, and there's a high chance of napping. So it's a no-no to me, but if they want to wear it at least onto the plane, a daily is great with no fuss. And they can just pop them on with a clean washroom and put on their glasses, or at least just take them off their seat if they're, they have a low refractive error. Dailies eliminate the risk of expired solution, but remember, you need both a sci-high lens and a daily lens for maximum prevention. Some doctors are under the mistaken impression that if you have a daily, it deals with a hypoxia issue. That's just not true. You still have the issue of the DK over T, and without getting into all the boring stuff, you need a sci-high lens for that maximum oxygen transmission. And the daily is extra insurance. And one of my favorite authors found that daily disposables were found to be associated with the lowest rate of complications in general. They also have low rates for severe contact lens microbial keratitis, that's corneal ulcers, and associated vision loss. Fitting lenses in silicone hydrogels and disposable contacts, daily disposables, while advocating against sleeping in the lenses appears to be the best form of prevention. This is a paper I wrote quite a while ago now, but it still remains true. And the reason for that is when bacteria get into a lens, even when we disinfect them in a non-daily, they create bunkers called biofilms, and some of them survive the disinfection process. So if you keep reusing the lens, you get the most battle-hardened bacteria that survive. And if you fall asleep, those are the guys that are attacking your cornea. As opposed to a daily lens where there's none of these bunkers built in, and all the bacteria are all rookies because you just put on that lens for the first time. So you generally get better outcomes and less vision loss if the complication were to occur. Contact lenses help your optical revenue. Don't ever think it's the opposite. Patients who have multifocal contacts generally will also have a progressive pair of glasses. They may want more sunglasses. They may want additional corrections. Sometimes patients need reading glasses over top of their multifocals for prolonged reading. That's okay. They're okay with it too. Don't assume that they're not, or that they're not willing to have several different options. You offer your patients occupational lenses for the computer and reading. Why wouldn't you do that in a contact lens? So don't limit yourself. They may need several options in both glasses and contact lenses, and that's perfectly acceptable. And you'll be surprised how many patients appreciate you giving them that flexibility. Now, a significant amount of toric contact lens wearers are nearing presbyopia. And so there are great solutions for these patients to compensate for both presbyopia and astigmatism, providing an optimal distance and near visual quality of vision without compromising the stereopsis. What about driving? Well, the research shows that driving performance is perfectly fine with a multifocal contact lens, just as good as PAL spectacles, and patients can identify signs and read just fine. Also, suggesting that patients, the studies show that, as I mentioned earlier, patients will adapt to a multifocal contact lens over time as they wear it from day 1 to 15. And this was not true of a monovision lens. So you're really maximizing the brain's power of adaptation with a multifocal contact lens. Some general tips as we're reaching the end of this presentation. Fitting multifocal contact lenses is an art and a science. Don't forget to tailor each situation to a patient's individual needs for outstanding success. So what I mean is once you get to really know your stuff, you can potentially break the rules of the fitting guide, but that's for very experienced practitioners. Multifocal contacts are a huge practice builder. Some may have attempted or have not even attempted or attempted and failed at fitting them. If you do so, trust me, they'll be sending you patients. Don't be afraid to bring up multifocal contacts with your patients. They're so rewarding. I find it's one of the most rewarding things I can do. As I said, that's for me a magical moment in my day. And while fitting guidelines are useful for most patients, listening to feedback is key for maximum success. Now, hopefully we have a minute for the advanced tips. I'll reveal to you my tips that I've learned over my 2 decades in practice. This is just maybe a concept, but it'll help you understand the whole science behind multifocal contact success. The key is to keep the disparity between the eyes low. The more you're putting 2 very radically different lenses between the eyes, the more the patient can notice it. You want it to be subtle. It's like a magic trick. You know they're doing something to manipulate your senses or to draw your attention to a different area, but as long as you don't know exactly what they're doing, you're still amused and it looks great. So covering one eye or covering the other eye is a big no-no. Don't let patients do it. Tell them not to. They want to see what's behind the science, but that ruins the art and the experience. It's just like when I was in the Harry Potter ride at Universal, and sometimes you're curious, like, how does it work? How did they make that spider look like that? And then the ride broke down, the lights came up, and I thought that my big, scary mechanical spider was just this plastic piece with, this fake fur on it, and it didn't look cool at all, and in fact ruined the experience because now I knew how it was being done. So you don't want to ruin the magic. It ruins the ride. Finally, you want the lowest add possible that you can use. Pretend it's like adding minus to a fraction. You want to be very careful about it, adding too much plus power, because the higher adds will increase the distortion. So you want the lowest add possible with the maximum plus a distance that the patient is willing to accept. So that's it for me, everybody. feel free to add me on the social media of your choice, on Instagram or wherever else. I'll see you out there. I'm going to stick around to answer your questions, and thank you so much for listening.
All right, welcome back everyone again. Jason Bingle here, and we're going to start the Q&A section with Dr. Mark Eltis. Thank you so much. What an amazing lecture. I learned a lot, and there's quite a few questions I have for you too, but I want to get to some of the questions that the audience has spoken in with. The first one is, we really talk about who's good candidates for multifocal contacts and who should we be thinking about, but the question came up, who do you feel in general is not a good candidate for multifocal fits? Who should we be avoiding, especially if we're early fitters just getting our feet wet with it?
Right. So I think what you want to avoid is just like LASIK. You don't want somebody who's type A who's going to need nitpicking on everything, even though you educate them on all the positives and minuses and all that stuff. If they're still that type of personality that's always going to find a fault in something, that's not for them, because there is no perfection in multifocal fits, just like in laser correction or anything else. I'd say it's less in laser correction in terms of having some kind of compromise, because a 20-year-old with LASIK could see 20/15 or whatever at both distance and near. But with multifocals, even if the vision's 20/15, there is some distortion, so they need to understand that. Now, for most people, just like for myself, when I tried them, and I didn't even need them really, and I'm like, there's no distortion, everything's fine. I don't know what people are complaining about, but there's just some people like that out there. So it's personality, I think, is the number one issue, rather than a condition or a particular prescription.
And expectations, probably, for sure.
Exactly.
The next question, in a world of instant gratification and high patient expectations, speaking of the last question, how do you set the stage for success with your multifocal patients? And what advice do you have for a doctor who's maybe struggled with the art of multifocal fitting in the past to give them more confidence with some of these newer technologies we have now?
Right. So I can tell you that the technology has improved so much since I started doing this 20 years ago that you really can believe in it, that you don't need to be an expert to do this. So if you follow the fitting guides, you should be okay. And if you have an issue, most of the companies can be called, or there's apps that can be used to guide you through it. Now, as I mentioned, you don't want to kind of go off the path, because once you do that, it's very hard for anyone to help you because they don't know what you've done. So if you just speak to the patient, you want to explain first rather than apologize later, as I was mentioning in the lecture, that you want to set the right tone and tell them what may not be perfect, or what they might not expect, like the lens is not perform as well in dim lighting. And so after that, follow the fitting guide and seek help when needed, and be honest with the patient. Sometimes you have to cut them off and say, look, I can't make your distance better because that will take away from your near, which you really need, or whatever it may be.
Since all these different companies have different fitting guides in general, do you think it's smart for some of these doctors just getting their feet wet to maybe start by just fitting one design, one company initially to get good at that, and then branch out? Or do you think it makes more sense just to kind of try a little bit of everything as you go and see what works better for your practice?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, of course, start with one and see how you're doing, but it's true that one lens won't necessarily fit everybody, either from a fitting standpoint or from a vision standpoint. But you can stick to, I have gone through periods in my career where I stuck to one just because it worked really well and it had certain components that I liked. So you can do that. That's not bad advice, but it's not hard to go to a different lens, because all you have to do is just look up the guide. So you don't have to learn anything yourself, really. You're just following what they tell you to do.
Very good, very good. Let's talk a little bit about your monovision patients, as you had mentioned earlier. So do you adapt your multifocal fitting and kind of stray from these guides, as it were, when you're changing from a true monovision patient into the multifocal designs? And would you ever take a happy monovision patient and try multifocals just to improve depth perception if they're not complaining about how they're doing?
So the truth is, and this is kind of where I separate, where I'm contradictory. For a doctor who's new to this, follow the guides, don't deviate. But it's just like cooking a turkey. The first time I followed everything because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. But now I know, well, no, actually it's cooked earlier than what the guide told me. I can cut the power down. I can do all this to make it juicier and moist and so on. So the same thing for the contacts. I will make an admission here that I don't follow the guide to it to the letter, and I play with it, and that's where you take it to the next level. But that's only once you've reached a certain level of experience, and you can, and I know kind of the science behind the lens, but otherwise you're asking for trouble. But yes, for most patients, I don't follow the guide because I know what I'm trying to do is, as I mentioned in those last few slides, to decrease the disparity between the two eyes and create as natural an experience as possible.
So maybe you would think about doing like starting out with like a slight modified monovision kind of an effect where there's maybe a little offset,
Yes,
but we're trying to reduce it as much as we can.
exactly.
Okay, perfect. Talk about young patients, your non-presbyopic or your pre-presbyopic patients that maybe have accommodative issues. And this is something I asked Dr. Kurt Moody in the previous session too. Do you fit those patients differently than presbyopic lens when it comes to multifocal lenses in general, or any other considerations?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what they're complaining about. I haven't done as much multifocals in pre-presbyopic patients, but there are some options on the market for that for those kind of conditions specifically, and screen fatigue and so on. But I have done that, and I have no problem fitting them into a multifocal. I can't say off the top of my head I have a strategy particularly for that situation because it ventures into BV, which is certainly not my forte.
Another question came in is, how do you handle cost pushback when it comes to upgrading patients to multifocal contacts in general? The higher fit fees, the higher lens cost, and especially if you're switching to like a daily disposable version of that too, when it comes up. How do you handle that?
Right. So for full disclosure, again, I work in a very high-end area, so it's not as huge of an issue. However, there's always people who push back. The thing is that the value is inherent when you tell a patient, and of course, if you have a very resistant population, you can even demonstrate it if that's something you want to do. And once they see the gift of being able to see up close and still have their distance, they may be very interested in pursuing it. The dailies, again, once you try someone in a daily and they're in it for 14 days or whatever it may be, they don't want to go back because it's inherent. It's like if you didn't know a remote control existed, and I think we're both lived in a time when there was no remote control. You can't go back. I could offer you the TV for a quarter of the price. There's no way you're going to do that.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I think really you have to look at it too as cost versus value, right? Value is absolute. If you show somebody the value in something, cost becomes less important to them,
Right.
and they find ways of saying, this is important to me. This does something for me. And I think a lot of it has to do with doctor education of these patients too. Like, here's what this is going to do for you. Here's the features and benefits and what it's going to do for your life. So I love that. It's been always fascinating to me when I used to travel to consult all over the country. I would go into places that were like blue collar America, and the doctors were like 90% daily disposables, premium stuff everywhere. And there would be doctors in affluent areas like yours that were 90% monthly, and they were convinced that daily disposables just don't work, that people aren't going to pay for them. And I think a lot of it has to do with the doctors too, and our mindset about prejudging patients.
Absolutely. And I circling back to the beginning of my lecture, it's all about emotions too, because people justify buying, a $5,000 bag when they're on minimum wage. So it's nothing to do with the price, it has to do with what their perception of that value and what it'll do for them.
Last question for you then, before we close this hour's session. Your thoughts on doing sensory ocular dominance testing versus the sighting ocular dominance testing, and determining when you do have to do those little offsets and disparities for your patients?
Yeah, I mean, if I'll say my favorite is still, the hold in the hand technique, and I actually look at them to do it. I don't just ask them. I watch it for the response. That's just my personal favorite, but I'm not an ideologue. I do glaucoma and dry, and I don't follow a certain school of thought. I'll do both tests if I'm not sure and get a result from that.
That's great. Dr. Mark Eltis, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been enlightening, and we appreciate your expertise as always. We look forward to seeing you again real soon. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in for this session. Stay tuned for our next hour with Dr. Thomas Quinn. Will be here in just a moment.